Give us a little bit of background on you first.
Yeah, there we go.
So a little bit of background on me. So I met Jason and Matt through school. So I grew up in small town El Dorado, Wisconsin. I went to a small high school, about 300 people in Rosendale, but was an athlete, was football, hockey, track guy. Matt and I were actually captains of the football team our senior year, and just had a lot of great people that were surrounded by me growing up that helped develop me as a leader, develop me as a Christian. Went through our hermeneutics group led by Scott Ritzma there, and ended up going to college at Liberty University over in Lynchburg, Virginia. I studied pastoral leadership, so I got major in pastoral leadership and minors over in Bible and theology, and it was really neat. Got an opportunity to play college hockey out there, and then ended up coaching college football for a bit at Trinity International University, where I was getting a master's in bioethics, and ended up moving back to Fond du Lac, and now ran for city council a couple years ago, and ended up doing some other fun things over the past 2 years, like working on the Trump campaign, and also now with Wisconsin Family Council.
As far as from where you started and the different things that you went through and just different things that you tried, what would you say would be the most impactful thing that you experienced that kind of brought you to what you're doing now?
So I'd say there's a couple things. In college, I was a part of a leadership program called Eagle Scholars Leadership Program. There's another thing called Forge Leadership Network. So I'd say Forge is just amazingly excellent. It's for young Christian conservatives to figure out what are they going to do in life and how can they make an impact in the public square. And so for me, it was really important to see, okay, I knew that God was calling me to ministry, and I knew I had an interest in politics, but I wasn't sure how to put that together. Most people often say, hey, we want to have politics the furthest away from religion or ministry or anything like that, because we don't want to get those two tangled up or involved. But it was neat to see how I can make a practical impact in the public square by using my faith to provide and promote Christian conservative values.
Which is something that I think as not even a community, but just as a country that we're just losing. It's just, I remember, I think it was Obama when he was his first term, he said, we're no longer a Christian nation. And I think at the time, I don't know if people really saw that impact, but I would say today it's more noticeable than ever before in history. And it's just something sad that I see. What do you think the steps are going forward? How do we bring those values back to I guess maybe starting at a community level, but also as a nation? How do you because you know a little bit more about the political side than we do, which we kind of want to ask some more questions towards, as far as the corruption that you see, or like how are the decisions made? How does he just come out? How does Obama come out and say, hey, we're no longer a Christian nation? Because as one of the most powerful leader in the U.S., for him to come out and say that, there's a lot of people that are just going to follow that, or just drop their whole ideal of, oh, well, I don't have to look towards being a Christian anymore because it's just not the thing to do. Or what do we have to do as a nation and a community, as communities around the U.S., to bring those values back? That's a tough question, but I'm just kind of going with what you gave me.
Yeah, so I think there's a few different things there to really highlight. I was thinking about this last night as well. It's just I got home and turned Sports Center on. I was just listening, and I saw there was a thing about Tiger Woods playing golf with his kid, and I was like, okay. So I looked up Tiger Woods and tried to look back at the scandals he had, and really what had happened, and it was 10 years ago, it was a huge deal. He lost all these endorsements, all these company endorsements he had just because he had extramarital affairs. And I thought, that was 10 years ago. In 2020, would that same thing happen with a professional athlete or someone that's in the public square? If they had extramarital affairs, would they really lose all of that? I'm not sure. And it just struck me as our society is getting more and more secular.
And it's only been 10 years.
Yep.
I feel like a lot has changed. Well, we're not that old, but just growing up in the values that we grew up with, maybe just in the home, but also it just seemed like we kind of got those because of the nation and who we were, like hard work, like working for things that you want, respecting people, being a Christian, like
Mm-hmm.
trying to find God, like understanding things like that. Like it's only been 10 years and it just seems like that's all gone. Where does that come from?
Well, I'd say education's a huge one, but also the breakdown of the family, as we've seen over the past.
I agree with like
over the
that's
past
huge.
50 years, we've seen a huge breakdown of the family, and so think of it as a stool. The three of us here, we're sitting on stools, and so we have different institutions that we deal with. One of those institutions is the government. One of those institutions is the family. One is often our churches, and then I'm forgetting what the fourth one is. But so basically, as one leg grows bigger and bigger, we see government grows bigger and bigger. We see the family grows smaller and smaller. It decreases. We see that causes a rift, and we don't have a stable chair to sit on. And so that's where I think we are in American society today. Is we've allowed the family and the church to decrease so much in its influence that now the government, as a result, has had to get much bigger, has had to get much larger, and we have a lot of instability due to that. But
For those of you that don't understand too, the U.S. was built on small government. They didn't want politicians to have their hands in everything, to make the decisions for everything, for everybody. Having a small government over you is ideal, at least in my eyes, especially in a capitalist country. But like Dan said, with letting the government just come in, and 9 times out of 10, when your government gets too big, the problems usually don't get fixed. They get worse.
yeah, and I personally, at least from a political standpoint, would much rather have the private sector come forward and help with these issues. I'd much rather see the faith sector. And I think there's great opportunities to have a lot of partnerships that help that. But I want to go back to what you had talked about is how can we make an impact and make a difference in our local communities and maybe even nationwide. But I think of last year I had an opportunity to go to just an amazing conference, and I recommend any Christians that are interested in the public square to go Touchstone. And they have a guy that wrote a book, Rod Dreher. He's also on the American Conservative, just has a lot of really, really neat writings and books. But his book is called The Benedict Option. And so it's interesting, as Matt, as you had put it, that what can we do to make a difference? And Rod Dreher's at the point where he says, I don't think we're there. He looks at, for example, World War II, when we have Dunkirk, and Britain is just getting decimated, and it looks like they're about to lose the war. And so instead of going all out and fighting and having this cultural war, kind of like we are seeing today with Christianity, they decided to go back to England to get recuperated, to build up the troops, to train in order for the right time to go back, and then they won the war. And so the Benedict Option, Rod Dreher is basically saying that's what the church should do today. Is for so long we've focused on evangelism, reaching the lost, which is important and it's good, but we've also failed to disciple Christians in the church where we don't know the Bible, we don't know the scriptures.
So
Yeah.
sorry to interrupt you there, but what I'm kind of getting out of that is, it just kind of like hit me. It kind of starts with the individual, and that's what Jason and I talk about on this podcast.
Personal responsibility.
Yeah, is taking responsibility for yourself. Eventually, there becomes a time where there's not going to be somebody there picking you up when you fall down, and I think, I'm Denzel Washington. He says, if I'm gonna fall down, I want to fall down on my back so I can see and get up. And I think it kind of resonates, like working on the individual to become better and to understand your values and God and like who Jesus is, and just not even that, but like just being respectful and taking responsibility for the work that you do. And you don't see that very much right now, especially in our generation. Maybe our grandparents, it was huge. Our parents, it's hit or miss. I would say it's 50-50 in the families that I run into that have good values and those that just kind of toss things aside and just live the daily life. But now our generation, I would say it's very rare, and that's kind of what we're just trying to get that out to people, is to bring that back.
And I think kind of a root of that as well is, so I'll often have people say, hey, Dan, I just don't understand why my kids aren't Christians or they don't believe. But I think it goes back to, as you had said, 2 generations ago we had authentic Christianity in many households where people took their kids to church, they read the scriptures, they did family devotionals, they did these things where there was genuine faith. But we don't necessarily see that today in the homes as we used to, and so a lot of kids, I'd say in our generation, as Matt, you and I are Gen Zs, and Jason's barely a millennial, we're all kind of on the line there. But what we had seen a lot of growing up and a lot of our friends was, hey, like, we'll go to church or we'll give to church, but in the home that was never alive. And so for a lot of kids in our age group, we'd say, hey, why would I spend 10% of my money I make? Why would I wake up early on Sunday mornings to go for something that doesn't make any actual change? And so I think that's really the heart behind the issue there.
I think a lot of times, instead of putting the money towards something like that, a lot of people just want to have that flash and they'd rather put their money towards something that makes them look good in the moment. Got to have the best of this or the best of that. That's one side of things as far as like a financial aspect, but then two, like, it doesn't, if you look at going to church, that's not the cool thing to do. And a lot of times it's what you see at all like the younger kids doing. Like, they just want to do what the cool thing is.
Yeah, and I was gonna ask that. If you look back, like it was when did it become uncool to believe in God? Like,
Yeah.
it seems like at some point it turned that now it's just uncool. Like, do you know what I mean? Like, what was that turning point? And how do we get that back? Like, really?
Yeah.
Not just as a nation, but like,
Just in
as-
your individuals
yeah.
with your friends and everything. And well, not even, I wouldn't say friends, as a lot of the times you try to associate with people that have the same beliefs as you, but you're still going to run into friends that don't believe in the same thing as you, and you're not going to disown them as an individual. And like, so, okay, this kind of goes into a little verse that I was reading the Bible the other night, and it was just a little devotion, and it got into some of the questions at the end were, who could I ask to join me in reaching our lost friends, and how can I be real and let others know that I need help in reaching my lost friends? So that kind of goes on to that. Like, when did it become uncool? And now I think the goal for us is to kind of reach out, put our hand out there, and find those people that are lost or don't think it's the cool thing, and show them how much happier and fulfilled your life can be by looking to Christ.
Yeah, when it comes to the uncool part, it's tough to say, because I'd always say at some point our culture has always said it's uncool to follow Christ in a genuine way. Look at the New Testament. Look at the early Christians that were literally crucified and martyred for following Christ. It was extremely uncool to the point that people would die. I think in our culture today it's become more polarized, especially politically, and we've seen more of a secular versus religious divide when it comes to partisan politics. But at the end of the day, I really do think that the key for us to make a difference politically and also spiritually is to reach people on an individual basis, and not necessarily for political gains, but to show that we actually care about them. I have a friend, Jack Jakubowski. He's got a really great book called The Bellwether Blues. And so he lives in Bowling Green, Ohio, as the chairman of the Republican Party. And so as the chairman of the Republican Party there, he's noticed that their county, except 2020 was a weird election year, but over the past, I believe it was 40 years, their county decided who won the presidency. And so what he had realized is that we need to stop going after millennials and Gen Zers purely just for political gain, but we have to show that we love them, we care about who they are. We need to disciple them. We need to share Christ with them. And so his focus was through ministry of, let's share the gospel with people that Christ redeems our sin, that we're all broken people. We're all separated eternally from God. And by Christ's perfect life, his death and his resurrection, that we can be saved in him. And by discipling people through the challenges in life, millennials like ourselves and Gen Zers, we often don't really have really deep, genuine relationships. They're normally mostly online, and we'll text people back and forth, but we don't really have those genuine relationships. So by having those, by discipling people, that's how we change people's hearts and minds over the long run. That's how people can become Christians, and that's ultimately how you can change the political landscape as well. But the political landscape by no means is the priority. The priority is people are on a way to hell without Christ,
Yeah.
and they need to.
And they
know who
don't
he
even
is.
know it. They don't believe it.
Mhm.